My name is James Falkner. I am a technical product marketing manager at Red Hat. I specialize in the JBOSS middleware, specifically EAP. And today, this is about as dressed up as I could possibly get. I'm normally kind of a developer. I'm from Florida, so Orlando, Florida, where pants are a foreign item to us. So we wear pants probably 3 or 4 days out of the year. So this is as good as it's going to get for you guys. So I apologize if you're offended by my look. So I'm going to be talking about EAP 7 today and technical trends in modern app development. You heard some high-level stuff this morning. Let's turn this thing on. And so welcome to the new digital architecture. This is where you develop asynchronous, event-driven, reactive, polyglot, agile microservices that expose APIs in a RESTful fashion, and they all kind of work together, and you can go fast, fail fast, and solve the world's problems. In the context of this new digital architecture, IT is really struggling to evolve. IT managers and architects are seeing their competitors and others using these microservices and containers, and they're like, "Why? We have a monolithic app. Why don't we throw our app on a container? Isn't that what we need to do?" Or we have a waterfall process. We have a 250-page manual that says how we get software from development into production. Shouldn't we be using Agile? Shouldn't we be on the cloud? Why are we spending all this money maintaining all these systems in our in-house when we could just throw it on the cloud and be done with it? More importantly, IT managers are asking, how do I keep IT relevant to our business? IT is, as I mentioned, is evolving, or in some cases not evolving. They need to stay relevant if they, number one, want to improve the business, and number two, want to keep their jobs. Also, with the advent of containers and virtualization, now we have the SharePoint problem of infrastructure, which is we have all these containers floating around and people generating software and deploying out to who knows where, out of control of IT. How do we get control of this environment? How do we deliver? I mentioned the cloud and cost savings. How do we scale out our apps without spending huge amounts of money? And finally, how do we get bits to production faster? Because bits in development are making zero amount of money for your business. It means nothing until it hits production. So really, it boils down to we want apps that are available immediately. We want to make changes that are available immediately. We want these apps to affect all parts of the experience of our lives, whether we're a student or a patient or a citizen. We want the features and the capabilities of your business to affect us in as much as possible. In fact, we want it to be aware of what we want before we even want it, right? 10 years ago, if you created, as a retailer, if you had a mobile app, that was actually really, really cool. Today, if you're a retailer without a mobile app, people look at you like, are you a dinosaur? Or why do you still exist? Where is your mobile app? I need to purchase things. I need to develop a relationship with you, and I can't do it. So this is awesome, right? This is like the best world we could all live in, and I'm sure you're all there. So it's kind of a pointless exercise to talk about it. Of course, let's get back to reality, right? That's the pie in the sky kind of end game of awesomeness with DevOps and microservices and containers. So in reality, we actually asked our customers, so many of you may have participated in this survey, but we asked around 1,000 Red Hat customers, what does your Java workload look like? And 87% is mostly on-prem, maybe a cloud app here and there, but most of it is on-premises, running either on bare metal or virtualized environments. Only a small percentage of companies actually have the majority of their systems on the cloud in a DevOps environment running on containers. So this end state sounds really great, and we do have customers that are there, and we know the benefits, but the vast majority of you are not there yet. So the question is, okay, with this baseline, what are the challenges you're facing? And as I think it was marked this morning, cost of infrastructure is number one. 63% of people said we're spending a ton of money keeping this infrastructure alive. Another half of them have legacy technology. They have apps. They have mainframes that they're having to pull data from. They might have old systems, old hardware, old operating systems or old software that's no longer supported, but keeps the business running, and they can't do anything about it. Another 34% talked about speed to market. So this is where the agile stuff comes in. They want to get to market faster, but they can't because of a various number of reasons. So then the next question was, okay, so with these challenges, how are you approaching your modernization of your IT? And 87%, so almost exactly the same number, said we're looking at microservices. Another 83%, so a vast majority of these customers that have these apps running on-prem using legacy apps are looking at microservices and containers as kind of the saving grace and the way to escape from this cost center and turn it into an innovation center. So that's really great because we have been doing this with customers for a number of years, and we kind of are that trusted partner that can help you move from the old to the new, so to speak, or evolve the old to still old, but with some of the newer characteristics that you can benefit from. But as I said, it's more than about just containers. Simply putting an app in a container and throwing it on a virtual server somewhere out in the cloud, that doesn't really solve your problem. In fact, the technology is not really going to be your biggest problem. The problem, and I'm sure you can all guess, is that the problem is a cultural problem, because getting higher level executives to believe in not only open source, but all of these new technologies like containers and DEvOps and agile processes and the cloud. The cloud had a bad rap for a long time. It was kind of like where you put code that you didn't really trust and you don't really know what's happening there. It could go down at any time. People didn't want to base their business on that. We've come through that era, and we're to the place where these four kind of main pillars of IT evolution together can bring those benefits that we see with the customers that we know have already gone through this process. Agility is great, speed to market great, cost savings great, attracting developers and giving developers freedom to develop in the way they wish, great. All of these benefits can be achieved through these kind of in concert, and you don't necessarily have to do them all at once, right? That's the Big Bang Theory doesn't necessarily apply to most companies. You can't make this amount of change in one go. It's taken several of our customers, years to get here. Maybe not 10 years, but 2 or 3 years. And other companies can move faster. Smaller companies generally can move faster. But even big companies, like the company mentioned earlier today that I shall not mention, the retailer that used to exist in Canada and is no longer here, they successfully, as a large company in the US, I'm talking about Target, they were able to use all of these technologies together and kind of make that cultural shift, and then kind of step down the ladder here and see the benefits by making that cultural change as well as the technology change with Red Hat. So really meeting the demands involve, number one, that transition, getting away from a cost center to an innovation center. So instead of spending the money keeping the lights on, spend money innovating on software, give the developers the freedom they need to innovate, either because you want to use a different language or possibly a new framework that's available, and they want to do it themselves. They don't want to have to depend on IT. So that self-service aspect of IT is really a great way for experimentation and failing fast. So if you have to wait, 3 weeks to get machine provision with a special amount of type of software or a special release of software, open source or proprietary, that really slows you down. So if you want to use your languages, you want developers to be able to use the tools they need, and you want to have your applications using a more modern architecture that allows that application to participate in an environment, say a DevOps environment, where you have a pipeline of jobs that run to build and deploy microservices, and you have teams that are specifically responsible for the code from production all the way to they're wearing a pager or maybe a cell phone on their waist at 2 a.m. in the morning when they get that call. So this is what Red Hat believes. This is how Red Hat believes you'll get there through these and other kinds of ways of thinking about how your IT is going to evolve. So specifically, I'm from EAP, the JBOSS group. JBOSS, if you don't know, stands for Java Beans Open Source Software, I believe. So it's Java-based. The vast majority of our products in the JBOSS organization within Red Hat are Java-based. So you've probably all heard this. How many of you heard Java is dead? Yeah, okay. So I think several of you are probably afraid to say it, but if you do a search on Google for Java is dead, guess how many hits you get? 14 million, right? Java has been dead for the last 20 years. But if you think Java is dead, ask Google, ask Netflix, ask Twitter. You know, these are major companies with high-scale apps running in production, obviously, all on Java. So it's not that Java's dead, it's the people that are saying Java is dead are dying, which is really a nice thing to see. So you can see we're kind of leveling off, which is awesome, right? Java was dead, as I said, 20 years ago, and the people saying this, they're no longer saying this, which is a good thing. But they are saying things like, we want microservices, right? This is the cool kid on the block. If you're not a microservice, then you're old and you're crusty and you're legacy and you're a dinosaur and you're monolithic, and that's horrible. Not true. They're also talking about container orchestration, like Kubernetes, for example. Kubernetes is enjoying a nice curve there of popularity. It's gaining quite a bit of steam. And then the darling of all DevOps-y container startups is Docker. So Docker, as a search term, is gaining, you know, it's dwarfing. It's an order of magnitude above those. And so these are kind of the new kids on the block, right? They represent an approach to software that incorporates new approaches, new ways of thinking about how apps expose their services. It's not an ESP anymore. It's not a Java API. It's a REST call over HTTP. So these are the Airbnbs of the software development world. One more slide. So if you look at the popularity of Java, it is declining. However, it's still almost, well, I guess about an order of magnitude higher than where Docker is today. So we see, and the fact that it's declining is not so much because people aren't using it anymore. It's kind of like, well, this is my opinion, it's established, right? There are big companies that I just mentioned that have been using it. There'll be big companies using it in the future. Red Hat is supporting 1,000 companies that use Java EE apps in production, and will continue to do that, you know, for the near and far future, as long as it makes sense to our customers. So Java's not dead. It's established. It's maybe not the cool kid on the block. It's not the Docker of today. It's not the Kubernetes or Mesos or, you know, other technologies used, but it's absolutely the backbone of enterprise development. The only other alternative is .NET, and nobody wants to go there. Okay, sorry. So Java apps. So Java apps are evolving, and the good news is that all of your expertise that you have in Java can go along with you. So we've got, you know, 2 decades of Java development, 2 decades of Java expertise in production. That does not have to go away. The thing that is changing, is evolving, is the way we're using Java in enterprises today and in the near future. We're doing a lot of work in EAP, which I'll get to in a moment, to make sure that the expertise that you have and the vendors out there that are using and producing Java and Java Enterprise apps will have, you know, a solid foundation, not just to support your legacy app, but also to kind of move into that whole microservices-y DevOps future, which I'm going to explain in more detail, more technical detail, how that actually is going to work. So Java as a language is evolving. Java EE, Java Enterprise Edition, is evolving as well. For those of you who are Java developers, you've probably heard of Java EE. If you have not, it's simply a set of APIs for companies that want to build apps that have to have enterprise features like, you know, persistent messaging and transactions and user management and things that you face when you're a larger company. So Java EE is simply a set of APIs. It does not mean that every single vendor that produces a Java EE implementation has to make a big and bloated and slow version of that. Historically, all Java EE app vendors were big, bloated, including JBOSS, were monolithic, kind of, you know, have everything in the box, and everything gets started up, and it takes forever, and that's kind of where the whole Java is slow thing came into being. That was a long time ago. Java EE and EAP in particular have, over time, since the first version of EAP, at that point called JBOSS App Server, has become a modular and fast and small, lightweight, very cloud-friendly version. And I'll show you about more details on that in a moment. Wildfly Swarm. So Wildfly is the upstream open source project that EAP is built on. Wildfly Swarm is a project within Wildfly which essentially is modernizing and modularizing Java EE. So you can take the best parts of Java EE that you need, package your application together, and turn that into what we call an Uber jar. And that jar is a jar file with all of your apps code and its dependencies that you can run in the JVM, a standard stock JVM, which makes it very friendly to cloud, very friendly to containers, very friendly to container orchestration like OpenShift and Kubernetes and so forth. So we are evolving Java EE ourselves. We're moving forward along with the rest of the community. We're not doing this, we're not going it alone. So IBM, Pyara Micro, the London Java community, SuJava, and there's one more I'm forgetting, are involved in a new project called MicroProfile, which I'll be speaking about in a moment. But let's get back to Java Enterprise App Platform. So what are we doing in EAP and specifically EAP 7? So it's the most popular Java open source Java EE app server on the market. Lightweight dynamic architecture, you can see all of the marketing gimmicks that we use. You can not only use Java EE, you can also use Spring. If you're a Spring fan, we don't care. We support a full spectrum of Java workloads, whether you have a brochureware site that's read-only HTML or JSPs, or a JSF app, or maybe you have a hyperscale transactional web app for a bank or a government. So we support all of those, and it's been optimized for modern IT infrastructure. I know that's a marketing term, so we'll get to more about that. But really quick, I wanted to show you some real numbers about how JBOSS EAP compares to the competition. So this is a graph of the installed footprint. So once you download this software and install it on your runtime, how large is it on disk? This used to not matter, right? You can buy a 1 terabyte hard drive for less than 100 US, or maybe around 100 US, which blows my mind. So back in the day when everything was running in-house on bare metal, you just buy a $100 hard drive, and it doesn't matter how big EAP was or IBM WebSphere, you just install it once. It's a pet system, you pet it, you give it a name, you fix it when it gets sick, and you only really install it once, so no big deal. Now, with the advent of pushing out a copy of this for every single container or every single node you have, Kubernetes node, or if you're running EAP in domain mode, every single slave, pushing that across your network, right, every night, which is what we're telling you, right? You want to get to DevOps, you want to do super fast, agile development, you're going to be pushing these things a lot. All of a sudden, disk footprint matters now. So we're not doing too bad, right? So these are kind of the full EE vendors, and the ones on the right are a subset, like Tomcat, for example, is a servlet container. It's not a full Java EE implementation, so it's smaller naturally. But with EAP 7, you get the full stack, all of the features of Java EE that you may or may not need in around 180, 170 megabytes. Compare that to WebLogic, which is around 700 megabytes. That's pretty significant. WebSphere does pretty well as well, a little bit over 100 megabytes. One vendor, one version of the Java EE app is missing from this slide. So if you compare us to WebSphere, IBM WebSphere 8.5, the full WebSphere, right? You can see it dwarfs the competition. So they're doing really well at inventing software to deliver to you and place in your containers. So that's a little unfair. I actually can't run that on my Mac, so I wasn't able to actually verify it. This comes from their minimum disk footprint necessary from their software requirements. It includes things like DB2 and their message queue product and several other ancillary products that you have to have in order to kind of have that full Java EE experience. But WebSphere Liberty is a good alternative if you're an IBM shop and you need an EE app server that's lightweight and starts up fast. Okay, next one, memory consumption. So just like disk footprint, memory consumption is important. RAM is cheap, but it's still not as cheap as storage. it becomes even more critical in a cloud environment. So the smaller the less memory you take up, the more you can run in a containerized environment, because that's the promise of containers, right? Efficiency of the use of the OS's resources through containers is a big promise of containers. So if you have a small memory footprint, you can cram many more containers onto a single CPU or single core. So we're doing pretty well here as well. We're not the smallest, we're not the largest. More important is the kind of the resident working set memory, the blue bar here. When products start up like EAP and others, they initialize things, they leave they leave object references all over the place. Once the garbage collector runs, then you drop down to kind of a more reasonable representation of what it will look like long term. So we're doing pretty decent there. Last one, startup time. This is probably the most critical for those of you who are developers in the audience, because you never write code correctly the first time, and you're going to have to restart, and you're going to have to redeploy. So getting these systems quickly up and running is a great thing to have. EAP, we're around 2 seconds, which is kind of around the average for the large vendors here. The smaller, like I say, the Tomcats of the world, they start up even faster because they have much less to start up, but also they offer they have many missing features compared to the full EE spectrum. So Java EE, it's not dead, but it is certainly evolving. I mentioned Wildfly Swarm earlier. So Wildfly Swarm is our early attempt at producing what we call a composable server. That means you can compose bits and pieces from EE, from other projects that are very popular these days, like Hystrix from Netflix or several other open source projects. You compose all of those into kind of a single runtime, and that was our early attempt. We sat together with other people in the Java EE community. Number one, we saw microservices coming down the pipe as being very popular. Number two, the steward of Java EE. Do you know who that is? Anyone? Which company is the steward of Java and Java EE? Oracle. Right, Oracle. I didn't want to mention the name, but I guess I have to. So that was the second reason why this happened, was because we saw a definitive lack of progress in the Java EE community. Oracle's participation in the standards effort was stalled, and is still relatively stalled today. And we saw Java EE as a technology starting to kind of be left behind, right? Because we have all these new non-Java EE ways of developing software with Node.js or you name it. There's Go, there's Erlang, there's Clojure. JavaScript in particular is also very popular. So we saw this happening, and we, as kind of a leader in the Java EE space, said we need to do something about this, but we can't do it ourselves. So Red Hat, IBM, Payara, London Java Community, Tommy Tribe, and SuJava in Brazil all sat together and released iterated on a micro-profile. And the word micro-profile essentially means using Java EE components to build Java microservices. So it's a way to kind of formalize a set of features that Java developers need to participate in this new world. It's very exciting. If you haven't seen it yet or haven't heard of it yet, just go to microprofile.io and you can get involved. It's not a standard. We're not trying to replace the Java standard or JCP. This is a collaborative effort in the open source community to define a set of recommended technologies that are good for microservice development. There's 6 implementations available today, one from us called Wildfly Swarm that I mentioned already. So Wildfly Swarm has a concept of a fraction, which is just a kind of a definition of what to include. And a fraction has been written, which includes, so the first 3 bits of microprofile are JAX-RS, so for RESTful services, CDI for doing dependency injection and lifecycle management of beans, and WebSockets is the other one, very popular. Is it WebSockets? Yeah, I believe it's WebSockets. So that's it, right? It's very small. The concept is, okay, if you're writing a microservice, it's going to be a very small RESTful service that does something in the back and then returns a set of JSON blobs. So that's kind of the minimal step. Now, that's not the end. There's other features that you're probably thinking of. Oh, wait, our app uses EJBs, or we need transactions, or we need some other feature from Java EE. That's the whole point of this process. It's not to standardize. It's to collaborate. Eventually, it probably will become a standard, and JCP is not where that's going to happen. The JCP process we don't feel is a good place to innovate. It's a good place to kind of set things in stone. But so this is the effort going on. Red Hat's heavily involved, and this is where we see the future of Java EE going. Okay, last slide on the marketing stuff. So Red Hat on OpenShift. So you've all probably heard of OpenShift. This is another effort to make sure that Java EE and Java developers can participate in kind of the next generation containerized, microservices-oriented, and fast, agile developing world. And so we are putting all of our, and we're not just throwing it on there. We are making Java EE services, Java EE-based services available on OpenShift. So you can write a Java EAP app or JBOSS EAP app, depend on the version of JBOSS EAP on OpenShift, and simply deploy it to your containers. So you'll get EAP supported, fully supported, and optimized for use within a containerized environment for free. Well, for your subscription, for free if you're using Wildfly, but as a Red Hat customer, you get that through your subscription. And this essentially makes all of the Java EE services available on the cloud for you today. And you can use OpenShift. You can run it on the cloud of your choice. You saw some slides earlier today about where the cloud deployments that we support. So very cool. And then there's a bunch of other products. I'm not going to go through them, but it's not just OpenShift. There's there's a constellation of products in the Red Hat Cloud Suite that allow you to develop and deploy to the cloud, the hybrid cloud of your choice, and use Red Hat's tools to monitor and manage and update it as necessary. Okay, so that's it for the marketing stuff. Let me check the time here. So we got about 20 minutes. Okay, I actually have a demo, but I don't know that we'll get to it. So I want to go through several slides on what's new in EAP 7. So assuming you're Java developers or you're Java EE developers, you're on EAP, or maybe you're not, but you're thinking about possibly changing. JBOSS EAP 7 was released in June at our summit. It was done back in March, but you guys probably know how marketing and engineering typically operate. Engineering is done, they say it's done, and marketing's like, no, you need to wait until the event so we can make a big splash. But in any case, it's out there, it's available earlier this year, and so I want to go through some of the new features. Just briefly, JBOSS EAP 7 is an implementation of Java EE 7. So the Java EE APIs I mentioned earlier, it supports both the full profile, the web profile. It also supports the micro profile, which is not technically part of Java EE, but it does support the micro profile that I mentioned earlier today. This has been true for the last 4 versions. So every version of Java EE that's released, Red Hat does a JBOSS EAP to match, to deliver the new features that the API calls for, and to improve on earlier versions. So EAP 7 is based on Wildfly, which is based on Java EE 7. The major release objectives was, again, to support both the web and full profiles to enhance things. So the management of your JBOSS domain is improved through the GUI and the CLI, which we'll talk about. It's more modular. This essentially means all of the things in JBOSS, we call them subsystems. They can be individually and selectively turned on and off. They will also only come up when called for. So it makes it very small footprint, unless you're using everything under the sun, which no one's using. It makes it fast to start up, and it makes it use less memory, which is awesome. In fact, the memory usage is also dynamic. So even if you have a set of features that you typically give, say, 1 gigabyte to, if you give it 500 megabytes, it will still work. The database caches and the connection pools will dynamically resize to accommodate that memory usage. Of course, you can still run it out of memory if you give it a small amount and then you run a large job. But it will dynamically adjust itself based on the memory conditions and the load on the server, which is awesome. Lastly, interoperability and compatibility, very important. You're probably not running EAP 7 yet, but if you're an EAP 6 user, you will eventually. Getting there, in some cases it's easy, you just install it and you're done. In other cases, you have large deployments. You might have a message broker that's running EAP 6 and you don't want to touch it because the girl that developed it and set it in motion has left the company. No one really understands it. You can still keep it up and running. EAP 7 can talk with it. It's compatible. and you can continue running, and then one day you can hire someone else to modify the other deployment later on once you are satisfied with the EAP7. So very important for us, both in messaging and in several other areas. We can essentially put the features, the new features, in 3 buckets. Operational efficiency, so managing and deploying and installing and maintaining and patching and reinstalling. Developer productivity, so how developers actually use EAP to develop apps. And then finally, the technology trends that it tracks and some of the new features related to, as I mentioned, microservices and containers. So I'm going to go through these real quick. So number 1, management. So EAP7, if you look at the architecture of the software itself, it's not radically different. So if you know EAP6, maybe you have developed a significant set of profiles and configuration, and you've written CLI scripts that do all sorts of magic. Those will continue to work. It's not like from JBOSS App Server to EAP5, EAP5. The class load of the JBOSS module system is still there. It's still the same, so that will continue to work. Even if you're using it yourself, if you have your own custom modules, that will work as well. So it's not drastically different. The same standalone and domain modes are supported. The same management APIs are available over REST. There's the same management clients if you're using the CLI, JBOSS CLI, which is a command line tool that we ship with JBOSS that allows you to interact with the underlying runtime system to make changes. There's some new features there which we'll talk about, but overall the CLI is there, the web console is there, that's also been improved. JBDS is JBOSS Developer Studio. This is our Eclipse-based IDE. There are some plugins for that as well. They're built in that talk to JBOSS to both manage, like deploy your app if you're building an app, or redeploy it or uninstall it. We also have Maven plugins. Maven is kind of the standard build tool for most Java Enterprise apps. Not all of them. Some use Gradle, some use Ant, some use, there's many others, older ones, but Maven is the primary one. So those are the primary ways you interact with JBOSS for managing JBOSS, not for developing apps, but for managing it. One of the new features in the CLI is what we call offline mode. This is a significant development for many of our customers who have security requirements. So what this allows you to do, if you use the CLI, is in the past, in order to use the CLI, you have to connect to a running server. If you don't have a running server, you have to actually start it up first and then connect to it. And that startup will open ports, it will initialize databases, it'll do all of the things that your app normally does at startup. All you wanted to do was make one port change, and now you have to start the whole thing up, right? That's silly. So the offline CLI allows you to start up what we call an embedded version of JBOSS. It only starts the administrative subsystems. So any subsystems you may have configured for JBOSS will not be started. It simply allows you to configure JBOSS without starting it up and without having to edit XML files, which is error prone, and nobody really likes to do that. So you simply start up the CLI with no commands. You're disconnected because you're not running. You run an embed server, it starts it up, and then you can issue all of the commands that you have previously used. So if you have a CLI script, and many of you do, I know I've written several to initialize JBOSS, to configure it for things like single sign-on and database data sources and stuff like that. Those you can execute without having to start your server up, which is awesome, especially in an automated DevOps-y containerized environment where you don't want to have open TCP ports that people can attack. Another new feature in JBOSS EAP7 is graceful suspension or graceful shutdown. So the typical use case here is where you want to make a configuration change, but your server is already running and in production. You don't want to edit the config file while it's running because it won't take effect till you restart. So this allows you to gracefully suspend a JBOSS EAP server, make the change, and then bring it back up. And by graceful, it means it doesn't just shut everything off. If you have in-flight transactions like web requests, or you have a batch job running, or you have an MDB message delivery in progress, when you shut that, or when you suspend that server, it will allow those to continue and either complete or time out within a certain number of seconds. but it'll gracefully wait for that stuff to finish. And then when you bring it back up, then it will resume where it left off. If you only have one JBOSS server and one node, then you've effectively turned off your server. But this is more useful in a clustered situation where you have multiple nodes, and the load balancer can start redirecting traffic to your other nodes when you say that this server needs to shut down. So that's kind of nice. In future versions, probably in 7.1, possibly 7.2, messaging and transactions will also participate in that. Those are much more well-defined, the behavior there. So gracefully turning those off requires a little bit more work to kind of make those actual changes. Okay, web console enhancements. So there's a new information architecture. So we have a UI, a user experience group at Red Hat that's kind of given an overhaul to the EAP console. Much easier to use. Better management of larger domains. So if you have hundreds of nodes in the past, the UI, you got this giant scrolling thing. Now you can group them. You can intelligently manage them in the UI. So that's great if you're using the UI. Installer's been improved. Questions have been added and reduced. The complexity reduced. We have new data source templates. So if you want to add a data source for Postgres or something, you can walk through a wizard instead of having to Google for the answer and copy and paste it into your XML file. And there's a couple of others. Preview panes give you, before you make an operation, it'll kind of tell you what you're about to do. And then the new subsystems, like the messaging and batch subsystems, are now represented as first-class citizens in the UI. Previously, you had to use the CLI or edit the XML file to manage them. So they're represented there, which is great. Okay. Here's a screenshot. If you haven't seen it, just download EAP and just run it on your laptop. Unzip and then /bin/standalone.bat or standalone.sh, and then go to port 9090. You'll see this, and you can drive around. Very helpful. There's some helpful guides, and here's another screenshot, I believe, of kind of shows you the information architecture where it kind of goes from left to right, and kind of like a finder if you use a Mac. The concept of navigating your file system hierarchy. It's the same thing in the UI. Okay, so another feature is port reduction. So having multiple open ports is a headache, both from security perspective and from just resource utilization. So EAP 6, when you started it up out of the box, you used around 20 or more TCP ports. There's not just the HTTP port, there's AJP, there are the message queue ports, there's all kinds of ports that open. And so that resulted in 20 plus ports. In EAP 7, we use 2 ports. We use 8080 for HTTP traffic, and we use for non-management traffic, I should say, and 9990 for management traffic. And we do that by multiplexing multiple protocols over HTTP using the HTTP upgrade. So essentially, when you connect and you want to speak a non-HTTP protocol, you first connect with HTTP, say, okay, I'm going to switch to, WebSockets, and then both the server and the client will switch, and then you're all of a sudden talking binary protocol over that same port. So multiplexing these different services. You can still use all 20 ports. If you have legacy apps that are speaking on these ports and you can't change them, you certainly can configure everything that previously used one of those other 18 ports to still use it. So it's not like you can't do it. But out of the box, it uses 2 ports, which is much friendlier, again, for resource utilization and security. We also replaced the web server in JBOSS EAP. A lot of the content that comes out of EAP is static, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We replaced it in previous version of EAP. We had Tomcat, essentially a derivative of Tomcat called JBOSS Web Server. In EAP 7, we've replaced that with an open source project called Undertow. It's a high performance, non-blocking web server, which essentially does the same thing, but does it better. It's also it's a pure Java implementation. It supports things like, let's see, you can do server-side JavaScript, which is a tech preview. It handles all of the things that a web layer would normally handle, like the web session. If you have, if you have a load balanced cluster and you hit one server, and then the other server, the second time you hit it, the session is replicated across there. It handles single sign-on requests. So basically, it puts a filter. Undertow has this concept of filters, just like we have servlet filters. Undertow has its own concept of filters, which handle all of the functionality that you see there. A very cool thing, you can also use it as a load balancer itself, which is extremely useful because number one, it's pure Java. Number two, it runs as a JBOSS EAP subsystem, which means you can manage it using the EAP management system. And it's super fast, it's lightweight, it's cheaper than having a hardware load balancer. It's a smaller solution to a load balancer as opposed to something like Nginx or again, Apache is another common load balancer you can use. So this is included out of the box in EAP. It's a software load balancer. If you need a load balancer, that's awesome. Batch utilities, so batch is, yeah, I got 5 more minutes. So batch utilities, Java EE introduced a new API called the batch API. This is an implementation of that. In our developer tool, you have a graphical way to construct batch jobs and see what they look like, how they relate to batchlets and chunks and so forth. I'm not going to get into that. It's kind of specific to the API, but it's a feature in not only JBOSS itself as a runtime feature that you can configure through the CLI, but you can also expose that to developers in the developer tool we call JBOSS Developer Studio. Speaking of the IDE, so IDE JBOSS Developer Studio 10 was released also, which supports JBOSS EAP 7. Includes all those things I mentioned. It also includes integration with OpenShift, which is really great because you can do things like import a project from OpenShift, make a change in the code in Developer Studio, push it to Git, and then have it automatically get built and pushed back into OpenShift. So it's a nice way to integrate, if you're using OpenShift and EAP together, a nice way to integrate them together from the developer's perspective. It respects all of the same concepts as OpenShift, and it makes sure developers have a view into your cloud deployment, and so they can deploy things if they have the right to into projects in OpenShift, which is nice. There's also a Docker console if you want to run containers directly through Developer Studio. You can do that as well. Okay, there's a screenshot. I won't do that. Forge is a project that makes developers' lives much easier. It basically generates code for you. Whether you're building a persistence unit in Java or you want to build a WebSocket app or an Angular app, you can, or you want to add single sign-on to your existing EAP app, Forge essentially generates code for you through a number of plugins. So if you need to get started, instead of Googling for things, just install Forge and then hit Control-4 and then pick what you want to do, and it will just automatically populate it into your project, which is really great. Then you can go and edit it and make changes and so forth. Okay, I mentioned modularity, composability. So the profile concept in EAP is no different. What is new in EAP 7 is a way to create a hierarchy of a composition of profiles. So if you have 10 different profiles you're maintaining and 90% of the profiles are the same, you can factor that out into a kind of a parent profile, and then the child profiles can inherit from that. It makes it easier for developers and for system administrators to keep track of their profile and make one change to affect all 10 servers. If you've changed a password to a database or something like that that requires you normally to go in and edit 10 files, you can do it with just one file. Migration tooling, so there's 2 ways to upgrade, or there's 2 things you have to keep in mind. Upgrading EAP, so the configuration of EAP, there are some new things, there are some APIs that are different. We offer a tool that allows you to, through the CLI, try and load your config file and then suggest changes as necessary to make it work in EAP 7. For the app itself, for your custom applications, we have a thing called JBOSS Windup, which is a tool that will analyze your code and tell you what's wrong with it and what needs to change in order for you to migrate to EAP 7 and Java EE 7. So we handle both server migration as well as application migration. And I mentioned before, if you don't want to upgrade, we can interoperate with older versions of EAP as well as other vendors as well through the standard process. Okay, Java EE 7, so these are all the new APIs in Java EE 7. Some of them were removed. If you're heavily depending on some of these removed ones, then you probably already know this already because these were removed. Java EE 7 was released, I think, 2.5 years ago, something like that. So you know about this as well, but these are the new ones. There's some cool features there. We don't have time to go through them. If you're running on OpenShift or on some other cloud through containerization, we make EAP available on OpenShift, fully supported, so you don't have to install it yourself as part of your cloud infrastructure. You can use our version from our trusted repository. If you're using it on Amazon, we also have a fully supported AMIs for use on Amazon. If you're using Linux containers natively, We have a Linux container for EAP7. It's a tech preview. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that it's not part of our regular QA process. It will be in 7.1, or it's planned for 7.1. And we also talked about Azure this morning. It's available now, but it's not supported yet. Okay, migration considerations. I won't go through this. I basically put these in. If you get a copy of these slides and want to see what some of the issues are, you can see what a possible resolution is for you. There's 3 of them here. And that's it. I think I'm done. I had a demo. If any of you want to see the demo is basically a microservices app running on EAP7 on OpenShift with Jenkins and a kind of a pipeline, kind of the future, if you will, vision of modern app dev. So I can show that to you after Phil and Prakash are done, or at the happy hour tonight. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, while we're setting up for Phil.
My biggest concern, I noticed that on the console you had beta. How ready is this product for production use?
On the console.
Yeah, you had a screen.
Oh, the CLI. So that was just a screenshot from beta. So beta came out back in, I think it was late last year. And 7.0 is done. It's generally available. 7.1 is planned for, it's coming up. So yeah, it's fully baked. It's ready for production use. Yeah.
Now, on deployments. On the main mode.
Yep.
Is that being addressed in this version? Similar thing. Have it running instead of.
So yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know which specific problem you're talking about. A lot of our customers are starting to use standalone mode and doing things like using OpenShift to deploy apps. So yeah, I don't know if we've addressed the specific issue you're talking about. Right, so it can't distribute the app to the different, yeah. Yeah, I'll take it offline. I don't think it has been, no. I don't think so.
And last is a huge integration. I know that there's a prerequisite for you to have EAP6 support.
Yep.
How does it
So Fuse 6.3 was just released. I don't know, I believe it still requires EAP6, but I have to check on that.